The Valorian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years, and Emperor Thaxon sat on his throne made of crystal from 100 dead worlds. He was massive and covered in black scales that shimmered like oil under the lights of his throne room. His 3 golden eyes scanned the reports from his scouts, and he felt nothing but boredom. Another species discovered and another world to add to his collection. The humans were primitives playing with fusion engines and basic weapons. They had spread across their small solar system like insects and thought themselves advanced. Thaxon had seen thousands of species like them, and all had fallen before his fleet. General Krevok stood before the throne with his head bowed low. He was old for a Valorian and had served 3 emperors before Thaxon. His voice was steady as he delivered his report about the humans and their small blue world called Earth. They had weapons that could split atoms and shields that could stop basic energy fire. They had colonized 17 moons and planets in their system, and had a population of 300 billion spread across these worlds. Krevok thought they might be different from other species, but he did not say this to his emperor. Thaxon laughed, and the sound echoed through the massive hall like thunder. He ordered his general to send the standard message of conquest. The humans would have 1 solar rotation to surrender or face complete destruction. Krevok bowed and left to carry out the order. The emperor returned to his reports and forgot about the humans within minutes. They were nothing and would soon be part of his empire like all the others before them. The message reached Earth on a cold morning in November, when most people were just starting their day. Admiral Peter Grant stood in the command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains and watched the alien text translate on the screens around him. He was tall with gray hair at his temples and hands that never shook even in the worst situations. He had commanded Earth's defense forces for 10 years and had dealt with pirates and rebels, but never anything like this. The message was clear and simple. Surrender everything or die. The aliens gave humanity 24 hours to decide. Captain Lisa Monroe walked up beside him and read the message over his shoulder. She was young and sharp with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her uniform was pressed and perfect even at this early hour. She asked what the Security Council was saying, and Grant told her they were arguing like always. Some wanted to negotiate and try to buy time. Others wanted to fight immediately. A few wanted to surrender and hope the aliens would be merciful. Grant knew none of these options would work because he understood something the Council did not. He studied the display showing the alien fleet gathering at the edge of their solar system. 3,000 warships, each the size of a small city. Humanity had 200 ships scattered across the colonies, and most were designed for exploration and cargo hauling. The odds were terrible, and any logical person would surrender immediately. But Grant was not thinking logically. He was thinking about what humans did when someone threatened their families and their homes. Lisa asked him what they should do, and Grant said they would fight. She nodded because she expected this answer. She had served under Grant for 5 years and knew he would never surrender. He opened a channel to every human ship and every colony and every military base across the solar system. His voice was calm as he told them what was coming. He did not lie about the odds or pretend this would be easy. He told them the truth. They were outnumbered 15-1 and facing an empire that had never lost a war. Most of them would probably die in the next few days, but he also told them something else. He told them that humanity had faced extinction before and had always survived. He told them about the wars on Earth and the plagues and the disasters that should have killed them all. He told them that humans were survivors and fighters, and that no alien empire would take that away from them. He ordered every ship to gather near Saturn and prepare for battle. He told the colonies to evacuate civilians and prepare their defenses. He told the soldiers and pilots and Marines that they were about to make history. The response came back within an hour. Every ship reported ready for battle. Every colony confirmed they would fight. Every soldier volunteered to be in the first wave. Grant felt something tight in his chest loosen. This was why humanity would win. Not because they had better weapons or more ships, but because when threatened, they came together and refused to quit. Lieutenant Jack Morrison received his orders on the bridge of the destroyer Defiance. He was young and had only commanded the ship for 6 months, but his crew trusted him. He read the message from Admiral Grant and felt his heart pound in his chest. They were going to ambush the aliens at Saturn and try to even the odds before the real battle began. It was a desperate plan that relied on surprise and perfect timing. Morrison liked it immediately. Commander Helen Price was his tactical officer, and she had already started planning their approach. She was older than Morrison and had more experience, but she never questioned his authority. She showed him where they could hide in Saturn's rings and how they could use the ice and rock as cover. Morrison listened and added his own ideas. They would plant mines throughout the rings and wait for the aliens to come close. Then they would hit them hard and fast before disappearing back into the chaos. The plan spread through the fleet and every captain added their own touches. They would fight like wolves hunting prey much larger than themselves. They would strike and fade and strike again. They would make the aliens afraid. Morrison knew many of them would die, but he also knew they would make the aliens pay for every human life. That was enough. That had to be enough. Emperor Thaxon ordered his fleet forward and prepared to watch humanity surrender. He had brought his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, because he wanted to see their faces when they realized they had lost. General Krevok stood beside him and said nothing. He had a bad feeling about this battle but did not share it with his emperor. Thaxon would not listen anyway. The emperor had never known defeat and could not imagine it now. That blindness would cost him everything, but he did not know it yet. The fleet moved into the solar system like a wave of darkness and headed straight for the ringed planet where humanity waited. The Valorian fleet entered the solar system with all weapons charged and shields at maximum power. Emperor Thaxun stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the tactical displays with satisfaction. His 3,000 ships moved in perfect formation like a school of deadly fish. They had practiced these maneuvers for centuries and could execute them while sleeping. The humans had never faced anything like this and would break within hours. Thaxun had seen it happen dozens of times before with other species. First came the shock and then the despair and finally the surrender. It was always the same. General Krevok watched the scanners and felt unease growing in his chest. The human ships had gathered near the 6th planet, but they were not moving. They were not hailing the fleet or trying to negotiate. They were just waiting in the shadow of the ice rings like they had all the time in the world. Krevok had fought in 40 campaigns and had learned to trust his instincts. Something was wrong here, but he could not identify what it was. He suggested to the Emperor that they should send scouts ahead, but Thaxun dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand. The vanguard moved forward with 600 ships leading the way. Their commanders were young and eager for glory. They had heard stories of the great conquests and wanted to add their own victories to the Empire's history. They saw the human ships hiding in the rings and laughed at the pathetic defense. Their weapons locked on and prepared to fire. They never got the chance. Lieutenant Jack Morrison watched the alien ships approach from his position on the Defiance. His hands were steady on the controls and his voice was calm when he gave the order. Helen Price activated the mines they had planted throughout the rings over the past 12 hours. Thousands of nuclear warheads hidden in ice and rock detonated in a carefully planned sequence. The rings lit up like a second sun and the lead alien ships vanished in the blast. 67 vessels gone in 3 seconds and the survivors were blind and confused. The human fleet burst from the rings at full speed with all weapons firing. They did not fight like the aliens expected. They did not maintain formation or follow any recognizable pattern. They moved like individuals working toward a common goal. One ship would target an engine while another hit the weapons and a third would cripple the shields. They worked in teams of 3 and 4 ships that communicated constantly and adapted to each situation. The aliens had never seen anything like it, and their tactical computers could not predict what the humans would do. Next, Morrison brought the Defiance alongside, a Valorian cruiser that was already damaged from the mine blast. He could see the alien crew through the windows trying to restore their shields. He felt a moment of pity for them because they were just following orders like he was. Then he remembered what they had come here to do, and the pity vanished. He targeted the exposed reactor housing and fired every weapon the Defiance had. The cruiser broke apart in a ball of blue fire and Morrison moved on to the next target. Captain Ryan Blake flew his fighter through a storm of plasma bolts that lit up his cockpit like lightning. His wingmate Sarah Mills stayed on his right side exactly 3 meters away. They had grown up together in the Mars colonies and had learned to fly racing through the narrow canyons. They used those same skills now to weave between the massive alien ships and strike at weak points. Ryan targeted a weapons cluster and Sarah hit the sensor array. The alien ship went dark and started drifting. They moved on to the next one without slowing down. Emperor Thaxon watched his tactical display fill with red icons showing damaged and destroyed ships. His 3 eyes widened in disbelief as the numbers climbed higher and higher. 400 ships lost in the first hour. 600 ships lost after 3 hours. The humans were everywhere and nowhere. They refused to stand and fight like civilized species. They hit and ran and hit again from a different angle. His commanders were calling for reinforcements and new orders, but Thaksun could not think clearly. This was not supposed to happen. The humans were primitives with inferior technology. They should have surrendered by now. General Kravok took command when he saw the Emperor was paralyzed. He ordered the fleet to pull back and regroup. The vanguard was destroyed, and the main force was taking heavy losses. They needed time to analyze the human tactics and develop counter-strategies. The retreat was orderly at first, but panic spread through the ranks as more ships fell. The humans pursued them all the way to the edge of the rings before finally breaking off. The battle lasted 6 hours, and when it was over, the Valorian fleet had lost 400 ships. The humans had lost 96 vessels, but their pilots had ejected and been rescued. Almost no human lives were lost while thousands of aliens had died. Lisa Monroe stood beside Admiral Grant in the command center and watched the enemy fleet withdraw. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline, but her voice was steady when she asked if they had really just won. Grant nodded slowly and said they had won the first battle, but the war was just beginning. The Emperor would be angry now, and angry enemies made mistakes. They needed to prepare for the next attack and make sure every colony was ready to fight. The message went out across all human channels. They had faced the mighty Valorian Empire and bloodied its nose. Celebrations broke out on every colony and every ship. People who had been terrified that morning now felt hope. They had proven that the aliens could bleed and could be beaten. The footage of the battle spread across every network and every screen. Humanity watched their ships dance between the enemy fleet and strike with precision. They watched the massive alien vessels burn and break apart. They watched and they learned that they could win this war. But on Mars, the celebrations were short because they knew what was coming next. Commander Danny Foster stood in the command center of Olympus Base and studied the tactical reports. The Emperor would want revenge, and Mars was the closest human colony. It was home to 3 million people living in domed cities and underground tunnels. It had mines and factories and farms that fed the outer colonies. It was valuable and it was vulnerable. Danny knew the aliens would come here next, and he started preparing the defenses immediately. He ordered all civilians to prepare for evacuation, but told them it would only happen as a last resort. He positioned every weapon and every soldier where they could do the most damage. He studied the terrain and found places where they could ambush the enemy. He sent requests to Earth for reinforcements, but knew none would arrive in time. Mars would have to hold on its own until help could come. Danny had fought in the Belt Wars and the Titan Rebellion. He knew how to make an enemy pay for every meter of ground. He would teach the Valorians that lesson now. Emperor Thaksun sat alone in his chambers and stared at the casualty reports. 400 ships and 12,000 soldiers gone. The humans had done this with a fraction of his numbers. His advisors were calling it a fluke and saying the next battle would be different. But Thaksun knew better. He had underestimated these primitives, and they had made him look weak. News of the defeat was already spreading through his empire. Subject species were watching and wondering if they could rebel successfully. His own people were questioning his leadership. This could not stand. He needed a victory, and he needed it immediately. He ordered the fleet to attack Mars with overwhelming force and gave explicit orders to take no prisoners. The Valorian fleet approached Mars like a hammer falling from the sky. 800 warships burned through space at maximum speed with weapons charged and ready. Emperor Thaksun had ordered them to show no mercy and take no prisoners. He wanted the humans to understand what happened when they defied his empire. He wanted their screams broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to anyone else who might think of rebellion. General Kravok led the attack fleet and felt sick to his stomach, but he followed his orders as he always had, Commander. Danny Foster watched the enemy fleet approach on his tactical displays and felt his jaw tighten. He had hoped for more time to prepare, but the aliens were coming faster than expected. His defenses were ready, but he knew they would not be enough. The evacuation ships sat ready in the underground hangars, but they needed 6 hours to load all the civilians. Danny would have to buy them that time with the blood of his soldiers. He opened a channel to every defense platform and every armed ship in orbit around Mars. His voice was rough like gravel but steady as a rock when he spoke. He told them the aliens were coming for revenge and would show no mercy. He told them the civilians needed 6 hours to evacuate, and every minute they bought would save thousands of lives. He told them their names would be remembered forever, and their sacrifice would never be forgotten. He did not ask them to fight because he knew they would. These were his people, and they understood what needed to be done. The responses came back immediately. Every station confirmed ready. Every ship reported weapons hot. Every soldier promised to make the aliens pay for every meter of ground. The battle began when the Valorian fleet entered orbit and started their bombardment. Energy beams cut through the thin atmosphere and struck at the domed cities. But the domes had been evacuated hours ago and were now filled with decoys and false signals. The aliens wasted precious minutes destroying empty buildings while the real targets prepared to strike. Danny waited until half the enemy fleet had committed to the attack before he gave the order to fire. Mars had been a mining colony for 100 years, and the humans had dug deep into the red rock. They had hidden railgun batteries in mountains and missile silos in canyons. They had placed nuclear mines in orbit disguised as space debris. All of these weapons fired at once in a coordinated strike that caught the Valorians completely by surprise. 30 ships exploded in the first volley, and 20 more were crippled. The aliens scattered and tried to locate the hidden weapons, but the humans had learned from Saturn. Every battery was mobile and moved after firing. Every silo had multiple exits. The aliens could not pin them down. Lieutenant Amy Chen commanded a missile battery hidden in Valles Marineris, the deepest canyon in the solar system. She had 12 launchers and 300 missiles. Her crew worked like a machine, loading and firing and moving to the next position. They would fire a volley and then drive their vehicles 5 kilometers down the canyon before firing again. The aliens tried to track them, but the canyon walls blocked their sensors. Amy kept firing until her missiles ran out, and then she grabbed a rifle and joined the ground defense. Captain Ryan Blake and Sarah Mills flew their fighters up from the underground hangars and joined the orbital battle. They were outnumbered 100 to 1, but they did not care. They used the same tactics from Saturn, weaving and striking and fading away. Ryan targeted sensor arrays while Sarah hit weapons clusters. They worked so well together that they seemed to read each other's minds. When Ryan's fighter took a hit and started losing air, Sarah moved in to cover him while he made emergency repairs. They fought like this for 3 hours until their ammunition ran out. The Valorian ground forces landed after 4 hours of orbital combat. 10,000 soldiers in heavy armor with weapons that could level buildings. They advanced on Olympus base expecting minimal resistance. Instead, they walked into a killing zone that Danny Foster had spent years preparing. Hidden guns opened fire from every direction. Mines detonated under their feet. Buildings that looked abandoned were actually filled with Marines waiting to ambush. The aliens took the outer perimeter but paid for it with 1,000 casualties. Danny watched the battle from the command center deep underground and coordinated the defense with cold precision. He moved his forces like chess pieces, always staying one step ahead of the enemy. When the aliens pushed hard on the east side, he pulled back and hit them from the north. When they tried to surround his position, he collapsed the tunnels and trapped them underground. He made them fight for every room and every hallway. His soldiers were dying, but they were buying time for the civilians to escape. At the 5-hour mark, Danny received confirmation that the last evacuation ship had left Mars orbit. 3 million civilians were safe and heading toward the outer colonies. His job was done, but he was not leaving. He had 300 volunteers who had refused to evacuate. They were Marines and pilots and ordinary people who had decided to make a stand. Danny opened a final channel to Admiral Grant on Earth and reported that the evacuation was complete. He said he was activating final protocol, and then he cut the transmission. Grant knew what final protocol meant, and he closed his eyes for a moment. Olympus Base sat on top of 3 fusion reactors that powered the entire colony. Danny was going to overload all of them at once. The explosion would be visible from Earth. Grant wanted to order him to evacuate, but he knew Danny would refuse. Some men were born to make the hard choices, and Danny Foster was one of them. Grant saluted the empty screen and whispered a prayer for the defenders of Mars. Danny gathered his volunteers in the main hall of the command center. They were bloody and exhausted and out of ammunition, but they stood straight and proud. He thanked them for their service and told them their sacrifice would save millions of lives. He told them history would remember this day as the moment humanity proved it would never surrender. He asked if anyone wanted to leave, and no one moved. They had all made their choice. Danny nodded and activated the reactor overload sequence. They had 10 minutes before the base turned into a miniature sun. The Valorian ground commander reported to his ship that they had breached the final perimeter and were entering the main complex. General Krivak ordered him to pull back immediately because their sensors were detecting massive energy spikes. The ground commander ignored the order because he wanted the glory of capturing the human base. He led 5,000 soldiers into Olympus Base and found it empty, except for 300 humans standing in the central hall. They were not fighting or running. They were just standing there smiling. The commander realized his mistake 1 second before the reactors exploded. The blast vaporized everything within 5 kilometers and sent a shockwave that flattened buildings across half of Mars. 3 Valorian cruisers in low orbit were caught in the explosion and torn apart. The ground force was completely destroyed, 5,000 alien soldiers gone in an instant, along with Danny Foster and his 300 volunteers. The mushroom cloud rose into the thin atmosphere and was visible from space. Mars had fallen, but the cost was terrible. Emperor Thaxun watched the recordings of the battle and felt something he had not experienced in his long life. He felt afraid. The humans had lost Mars, but they had killed 300 of his ships and 15,000 soldiers. They had evacuated every civilian and denied him the satisfaction of conquest. Worse, they had broadcast the entire battle across every channel. The galaxy had watched humans fight to the last breath and detonate their own base rather than surrender. Subject species across the Empire were rioting and demanding freedom. His generals were questioning his strategy. Thaxun realized he had made a terrible mistake. These humans were not like other species. They would never stop fighting, and they would burn his empire down even if it cost them everything. 3 days after Mars fell, the message arrived at Earth from the Valorian flagship. Emperor Thaxun was requesting a meeting with humanity's leaders to discuss terms of surrender. Admiral Peter Grant read the message twice and felt a cold smile cross his face. The Emperor was calling it a negotiation, but Grant knew what it really meant. The aliens were worried and looking for a way to end this war without losing face. That meant humanity had a chance to win if they played this correctly. The Security Council wanted to refuse the meeting, but Grant convinced them otherwise. He stood in the council chambers and explained his reasoning while they listened. The Emperor had lost 800 ships in 2 battles. His subject species were rioting across the Empire. His own generals were questioning his leadership. He needed this war to end quickly before everything collapsed. But his pride would not let him retreat without some kind of victory. Grant proposed using that pride against him. They would meet with the Emperor and show him that continuing this war would destroy everything he had built. If he was smart, he would take the out they offered. If he was stupid, he would attack Earth and learn why that was a fatal mistake. Captain Lisa Monroe was chosen to accompany Grant to the meeting along with 6 Marines for security. Commander Helen Price would command an escort fleet of 50 ships hidden in Jupiter's magnetosphere. If the meeting went wrong, they were to escape and warn Earth immediately. The location was set for a small moon orbiting Jupiter that had no strategic value. The aliens chose it because it was neutral ground, and Grant accepted because it gave Helen cover to hide her ships nearby. The transport ship carried them across the solar system, and Grant spent the time reviewing everything they knew about Valorian culture. They valued strength above all else and saw compromise as weakness. They had ruled for 12,000 years by convincing everyone they were invincible. That image had been shattered at Saturn and Mars. Now Grant needed to shatter it completely. Lisa asked him what he planned to say, and Grant told her he was going to offer the Emperor a choice. Leave now and keep his empire, or stay and lose everything. The trick was making him believe it. The moon was small and barren with no atmosphere and barely any gravity. Both sides had erected temporary buildings for the meeting using force fields to hold in air. The Valorian shuttle landed first and 100 guards formed up around it. Emperor Thaxun emerged wearing armor made from metal that seemed to drink light. He was massive even by alien standards, and his 3 golden eyes swept the landing area like searchlights. Grant landed his shuttle precisely 20 meters away and stepped out with only Lisa and his 6 Marines. He wore his dress uniform with all his medals, but carried no weapons. It was a calculated insult that said he did not fear the Emperor. They met in the center building at a table that had been designed for species of different sizes. Thaxun sat on one side with General Krivok and 20 guards. Grant sat opposite with Lisa and the Marines standing behind him. The 2 leaders studied each other in silence for a long moment. Thaxun expected to see fear or at least respect in the human's eyes. Instead, he saw calm determination and something that might have been pity. That look made the Emperor angrier than any insult could have. Thaxun spoke first in a voice like grinding stone. He announced himself as the eternal Emperor of the Valorian Empire and ruler of 300 star systems. He said humanity had fought well for primitives but could not win against his might. He offered them mercy if they surrendered immediately. Their species would be allowed to exist as servants of the Empire. Their colonies would pay tribute and their soldiers would join his armies. He called this generous and said they should be grateful. If they refused, he would turn Earth into molten glass and hunt down every human in the galaxy. He finished and waited for the humans to beg for mercy. Grant let the silence stretch for 10 seconds before he responded. His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly in the small room. He said the Emperor could call himself eternal, but he would be dead within a month if this war continued. Thaxon's guards raised their weapons, but the Emperor waved them down. He asked how the human dared to threaten him. Grant said he was not threatening but stating facts. The Emperor had conquered 47 species in 12,000 years. Did he know why? Because those species were isolated and divided and weak. Humanity was different. Grant stood and walked to the window overlooking the moon's surface. He spoke without looking at the Emperor. He said humanity was 300 billion people spread across 50 colonies, all united by a single truth. They would never submit. The Emperor could destroy their cities and burn their worlds and kill billions of them. They would rebuild and come back stronger every time. That was what humans did. They survived. He turned and looked directly at Thaxon with no fear in his eyes. He said the Emperor's fleet had been bloodied twice by an enemy that should have been easy to crush. How did that look to his subject species? How long before they realized the mighty Valorian Empire could be beaten? Lisa stepped forward and added her own thoughts. She said humanity was already broadcasting footage of every battle across every frequency they could find. The whole galaxy was watching the great Emperor struggle against one primitive species. His subject races were rioting and demanding freedom. His generals were losing faith. His empire was cracking from within. How many rebellions could he handle at once? How long before the subject species realized they outnumbered their masters 1,000 to 1? She said humanity did not need to defeat the Empire militarily. They just needed to show everyone else that it was possible to fight back. Thaxon felt rage building in his chest until it became a physical pressure. He roared and slammed 4 of his 6 hands on the table hard enough to crack it. He said he had crushed 1,000 rebellions and would crush 1,000 more. His empire had stood for 12,000 years and would stand for 12,000 more. The humans were nothing but insects who would be swept away. Grant waited for the Emperor to finish and then spoke again in that same quiet voice. He said the Emperor could believe that if it made him feel better, but the facts said otherwise. 2 battles and 800 ships lost. Mars had cost him 300 more ships and 15,000 soldiers. At that rate, his fleet would be gone in 2 weeks. Grant walked back to the table and placed both hands on it. He leaned forward and looked into all 3 of the Emperor's golden eyes. He said humanity was offering him a chance to save his empire. Leave their space immediately and never return. They would call it even and let him keep his 300 systems. Go back and crush his rebellions and rebuild his image, or refuse and watch as humanity tore down everything he had built system by system and planet by planet. They would make sure every subject species knew how to beat him. They would arm the rebels and teach them human tactics. They would turn his empire into a graveyard. The choice was his, but he needed to choose now. The Emperor stood and his guards tensed. He towered over Grant by more than a meter, but the human did not step back. Thaxon said he would see humanity extinct before he accepted surrender from primitives. Grant nodded slowly and said the Emperor would try, but he would not live to see it finished. He turned and walked toward the exit with Lisa and his Marines following. At the door he stopped and looked back one last time. He said the Emperor had one more chance to make the smart choice. Walk away now or die trying to conquer Earth. Those were the only options. Then he left without waiting for a response. On the shuttle back to Earth, Lisa asked if Grant really thought the Emperor would back down. Grant said no because men like Thaxon could not accept defeat. His pride would make him attack Earth with everything he had left. That was what Grant was counting on. Lisa looked confused, so he explained. The Emperor would gather every ship and every soldier for one final assault. He would put all his eggs in one basket, because he needed an overwhelming victory to restore his image. And when he committed everything to Earth, he would leave the rest of his empire undefended. That was when the rebellions would explode across hundreds of worlds. The Emperor would win or lose everything on Earth, and Grant intended to make sure he lost. Back on the moon, Emperor Thaxon watched the human shuttle depart and felt something cold settle in his stomach. General Krivok stood beside him and said they should consider the humans' offer. The Empire was unstable and another defeat could trigger a complete collapse. Thaxun turned his 3 eyes on his general and asked if he was a coward. Kravok said no, but he was a realist. They had underestimated the humans twice and paid dearly both times. Perhaps it was time to admit this enemy was different. Thaxun roared that there would be no retreat. He ordered every ship and every soldier to gather for an assault on Earth. They would overwhelm the humans with pure numbers and show the galaxy what happened to those who defied him. Kravok bowed and went to carry out the orders. He knew this would be his last campaign because the Emperor had already lost even if he did not realize it yet. Emperor Thaxun assembled the largest fleet in Valorian history for the assault on Earth. 2,000 warships, pulled from every corner of the Empire along with 300 troop carriers and siege platforms. He had stripped the defenses from 100 worlds and recalled every ship from patrol duty. The subject species watched and whispered among themselves. The Emperor was gambling everything on this one battle. If he won, his power would be restored. If he lost, the Empire would shatter like glass. Thaxun did not care about their whispers because he could not imagine losing to primitives, no matter how stubborn they were. Admiral Peter Grant watched the enemy fleet approach and felt a strange calm settle over him. The last 2 weeks had been spent in frantic preparation. Every human ship from every colony had raced home to defend humanity's birthplace. Scientists had analyzed every second of footage from Saturn and Mars looking for weaknesses in Valorian technology. Engineers had worked around the clock building new weapons based on what they learned. Soldiers had trained until they moved like machines. Now it was time to see if any of it would be enough. Grant stood in the command center of Earth's newest ship, the Indomitable. It had been a colony transport 3 weeks ago, but had been converted into a warship with every weapon humanity could bolt onto it. The ship was ugly and asymmetric, but it could hurt the enemy, and that was all that mattered. He opened a channel to every human ship and every defense platform. His voice was tired but steady when he spoke. He told them the enemy was coming with everything they had. This would be the final battle of the war. If humanity won, they would be free. If they lost, there would be no tomorrow for anyone. He did not give them a speech about glory or honor. He just told them to fight smart and watch each other's backs. That was all they needed to hear. The Valorian fleet entered Earth's atmosphere at dawn over the Pacific Ocean. Their shields glowed as they descended through the air, preparing to rain fire on the cities below. Admiral Grant watched them come and gave the order to fire. The ocean erupted as thousands of railguns emerged from underwater positions. They had been built in secret over the past 2 weeks and powered by fusion reactors hidden on the seafloor. The projectiles were solid tungsten rods accelerated to a fraction of light speed. They punched through Valorian shields like they were made of paper. 60 ships fell burning into the sea in the first minute. The survivors scattered and tried to locate the weapons platforms, but the railguns were already submerging and moving to new positions. The ocean had become a deadly maze where death could come from any direction. The Valorians pulled back from the atmosphere and tried to regroup. That was when the human fleet struck from orbit. Lieutenant Jack Morrison led the attack with every ship they had. 400 vessels against 2,000, but the humans had learned from their earlier battles. They did not fight like the enemy expected. Morrison divided his fleet into groups of 10 ships that operated independently. Each group had a specific target and a specific job. Some hit engines. Some targeted weapons. Some went after shields. They coordinated through constant communication and adapted to every situation. The Valorians tried to maintain formation, but it was impossible when the enemy refused to fight conventionally. Human ships would appear from unexpected angles and strike before vanishing. The aliens would turn to engage and find empty space. It was maddening and exhausting and slowly grinding down the Valorian fleet. Captain Ryan Blake and Sarah Mills flew their fighters through the chaos like they had been born in space. They had survived Saturn and Mars and learned more about combat than most pilots learned in a lifetime. They moved together like dancers, striking at vulnerable spots and fading away before return fire could touch them. Ryan would draw enemy fire while Sarah hit them from behind. Then they would switch roles seamlessly. They destroyed 12 enemy fighters in the first hour and damaged twice that many. They made it look easy, but both of them were running on adrenaline and coffee. Their bodies ached and their hands cramped, but they did not stop. They could not afford to stop. Commander Helen Price coordinated the defense from her position on the battle cruiser Defiant. She watched hundreds of displays showing the status of every human ship. She saw where the enemy was concentrating and directed reinforcements. She saw where human ships were in trouble and sent help. She was the thread that held the defense together, and she did it with cold efficiency. When a group of Valorian ships broke through the line and headed for Earth, she sent 20 fighters to intercept. When the aliens tried to flank from the moon, she had ships waiting. She was always 3 steps ahead because she understood something the enemy did not. Humans could think creatively while the Valorians followed rigid doctrine. The battle raged for 12 hours without pause. Ships burned and died on both sides. The space around Earth became a graveyard filled with debris and bodies. The Valorians kept pressing because they had no choice. The Emperor had ordered them to take Earth, and they would follow orders until they died. The humans kept fighting because this was their home, and they would defend it with their last breath. Neither side would surrender and neither side would retreat. It was a war of attrition now, and both fleets were being ground down to nothing. Emperor Thaxon watched from his flagship as the battle turned against him. Half his fleet was gone and the humans were still fighting. His commanders were requesting permission to withdraw, but he refused. He had gambled everything on this assault and could not accept defeat. General Krevok was dead, along with his ship destroyed by a kamikaze run hours ago. Thaxon's personal guard had been reduced to 30 soldiers. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion was filled with smoke and sparking consoles. Still, the Emperor would not retreat. He ordered all remaining ships to rally to his position. They would make one final push through the human lines and bombard Earth directly. If he could not conquer the humans, he would kill them all. Admiral Grant saw the enemy fleet concentrating around the Emperor's flagship and knew what was coming. He had prepared for this moment, and now it was time to reveal humanity's final weapon. During the 2 weeks of preparation, human engineers had converted 3 old colony ships into massive kinetic weapons platforms. They were crude and ugly, but they could accelerate asteroids to incredible speeds using magnetic catapults. The ships had been hiding on the far side of the moon, waiting for this exact moment. Grant gave the order, and the 3 ships moved into firing position. The colony ship crews had volunteered for this mission, knowing they probably would not survive. The weapons platform drew enormous power, and the ships were barely holding together. They did not care because their families were on Earth below. They loaded asteroids into the launch rails and began the firing sequence. The magnetic fields built to maximum and then released. 3 asteroids, each the size of a building, flew toward the Valorian fleet at speeds that made them invisible to the naked eye. The Eternal Dominion's shields could stop energy weapons and missiles. They could not stop that much mass moving that fast. The first asteroid hit the flagship's port side and sheared off 1/3 of the massive vessel. The second impact destroyed the engines and left the ship drifting. The third struck the bridge section where Emperor Thaxon stood. He had one moment of perfect clarity as the asteroid tore through the hull. He understood finally what made humans different. They did not fight for glory or conquest. They fought for each other and for their home. That made them willing to sacrifice everything, and that made them impossible to defeat. The asteroid crushed him and everything around him. Emperor Thaxon, the eternal 7th of his name, died without seeing another sunrise. The remaining Valorian ships saw their Emperor's flagship break apart and lost all will to fight. They scattered and fled in every direction. Some tried to surrender, but most just ran. The humans let them go because they were too exhausted to pursue. The battle was over. Earth had survived, but the cost had been terrible. 200 human ships destroyed and 50,000 soldiers dead. Cities lay in ruins and orbital stations were shattered. But they had won. The Valorian Empire was broken. Admiral Grant stood at the observation window of the Indomitable and watched Earth slowly rotate below. Fires burned in a dozen cities, but they would be rebuilt. Humanity had survived worse and always came back stronger. Lisa Monroe joined him, still wearing her combat suit. Her face was streaked with sweat and her eyes were red from exhaustion. She said they had won, and Grant nodded. They had done more than win. They had shown the galaxy that humanity could not be conquered. News of the Emperor's death spread across 300 star systems within hours. The subject species of the Valorian Empire rose in rebellion everywhere at once. Without the Emperor's iron will to hold it together, the Empire collapsed in weeks. Millions who had lived under alien rule for generations tasted freedom for the first time. Humanity spent the next year helping those freed worlds establish their own governments and build their own fleets. They did not conquer or demand tribute. They offered friendship and alliance. It was a new way of doing things in a galaxy that had known only domination for 12,000 years.